I'm Ken McLeod. I'm the Policy Director for the League of American Bicyclists, and this is the Bicycle Friendly State Ranking Preview webinar. And I'll let my colleague Jamil introduce himself.
Thanks, Ken. Hey, everybody. I'm sure many of you have emails from me, many emails, but my name is Jamil Matafari, and I'm a policy specialist here at the League.
Thanks. So this is the Bicycle Friendly State Preview. A little bit of history on the Bicycle Friendly State program. It was started by the League in 2008. In 2015, we went from an every year ranking to an every other year ranking. If you're interested in finding the historical ranking of your state, that's available at the link on this page. It has the ranking from each year that we did it. Initially, there were not report cards for every state, so that was a more recent addition. For every year that we have report cards available, those report cards are also available on our website. So you can look at what we've been saying states should do, I think going back to 2014. And the survey has changed over time. At its peak of size, it was more than 80 questions with more than 300 potential answer options. I actually think it was closer to 340. So it was very, very long. And we've really tried to slim it down, make it easier to complete, make it hopefully easier to understand, interact with, make progress on. And so that current iteration is 36 questions with about 100 potential answer options for those questions. And I'll hand it to Jamil to talk a little bit about the survey process.
Yeah, so as Ken said, every 2 years, we ask state bike and pedestrian coordinators to complete the bicycle-friendly survey. This year, 48 out of 50 states completed the survey, and the 2 missing states were a result of capacity challenges. Our process for distributing and collecting surveys starts in late May with an email to state bike ped coordinators, giving them a heads up about the survey and asking if they're the proper contact. This year, we sent the surveys to DOT contacts in early June with an end of July deadline, which we extended till the end of August. In the middle, we set each state their answer key, which contains their publicly available data reused in the BFS ranking and report cards to help ensure the data is correct. After we close the survey, analyze the data, we send the draft report cards to each state's statewide cycling advocacy group to review our feedback and provide their own if they choose. This is an opportunity for folks to share additional details or data that may have been left off the survey. We use this feedback to edit the report cards before finalizing and moving to the final steps of sending embargoed copies to survey completers and to the statewide advocacy groups for a final check before we publish the ranking and report cards a few days later. And now we'll dive in a little bit to the 2024 survey. And so this year, the survey consisted, as Ken said, of 36 questions broken into 7 categories, which you can see on the screen. The survey was slightly longer than our 2022 survey, with reorganized categories and a few new questions. This year, there were a total of 250 available points and up to 10% of available points for judge discretion to account for incorrect survey data, states with missing data, and other factors that do not easily fit within the survey data or the public data that we use for the scores. The categories were unweighted outside of having differing available point totals. And so as you can see, the survey is broken down into these 7 categories. I'll just list them off and go through the points. So funding, infrastructure, safety, planning, laws, every ride counts, and capacity and support. And so funding, infrastructure, and safety each offered 40 points or 16% of all available points, with planning and laws each offering 35 points or 14% of all available points. Every ride counts was worth up to 35 points or 14%, and then capacity and support could up to 25 points or 10% of all available points. And so as I mentioned previously, we included 8 new questions in the survey. 2 were in funding, 2 in infrastructure, 2 in planning, and 2 in safety. And now we'll move on a little bit to discuss the guide. And so this year, when you receive the report cards, when we release them, accompanying them will be the report card guide, the bicycle-friendly report card guide. And the guide is essentially this webinar housed in a Word document. Here, you can learn more about the survey and ranking process, specific metrics, and more details on the categories and a breakdown of the 5 bicycle-friendly actions. So like I said, we will share this guide when we release the report cards to help you better understand the rankings, data, and the process. Back to you, Ken.
Thanks, Jamil. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key data that we feature on the report cards. We often get questions about this data, and this has been the same metrics reported over time since 2017. So we report on ridership, safety, and spending, and we give a number for each state and then also their rank relative to other states. So for ridership, we are looking at data from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey. We publish the percent of workers who use a bicycle as their primary mode of transportation to work. This data can also be found on our website, data.bikeleague.org. And the figure you're going to chase down there is figure 2.1.3. And you can see most states had a significant drop in the rate of biking to work during COVID, when less people were going to work. Nationwide, it has recovered somewhat back to previous levels. Really, the peak of American Community Survey estimates of the rate of biking to work was back in maybe 2014. And it's hovered nationwide around 0.5% of commuters using a bike as their primary mode of transportation to work since then. But it varies greatly from state to state. And this is the only yearly national estimate we have from any public agency about how much biking is happening in each state. So that's why we use this data. For our safety metric, we use bicyclist fatalities per 10,000 bicycle commuters. So this uses data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's Fatality Analysis Reporting System, which is an annual reporting of all traffic fatalities involving moving vehicles on public roadways. So it doesn't capture all bicyclist fatalities, but it captures ones that involve moving motor vehicles. And then usually in traffic safety, if we're reporting on motor vehicle fatalities, agencies will adjust that by motor vehicle volumes, vehicle miles traveled. If you've read the book Killed by a Traffic Engineer, you may know that this comes from an auto industry exec who wanted a metric that made it appear like driving was very safe. And when you divide fatalities in cars by vehicle miles traveled, you get a low number. So there are reasons you may not want to do that, but it is a generally accepted metric throughout the traffic safety sphere in the United States. And since we don't have anything like bicycle miles traveled in the United States, we use the census estimate of bike commuters as a proxy to kind of adjust for how much biking may be happening in each state. We know it doesn't capture anything like all biking in each state. If you believe the National Household Travel Survey, somewhere between 16 and 18% of bicycling trips are trips for work. And those aren't even all necessarily commuter trips for work. If you were a DoorDash rider using your bike for work, that is not a commute trip, but it is a trip for work. But so that's why we do this way. It sometimes does give funky numbers, like Alabama, where it says there were 51 bicyclist fatalities per 10,000 bicycle commuters, but there were less than 10 fatalities, I think, in 2022 in Alabama. So because they have so few bicycle commuters, it inflates that number. So there are oddities of this number, but the reason we choose it is to have something that is comparable between states and something that captures that adjustment for how much biking is happening, in a similar way that we often see motor vehicle fatality statistics reported. And then finally, spending. We use federal obligations per capita. So this comes from the Federal Highway Administration, and they publicly report this data. And on their public reporting site, there's a big, bold caveat against using this to compare states. However, again, this is the only nationally reported spending data that we have access to. So we use it. We use it in two primary ways. One is we look at the percentage that each state spends compared to all of their federal highway spending. And that's a thing that we cover with our Bike Friendly Action if they spend 2% or more of their federal funds on biking and walking. And then we also report it as a per capita figure here in our key data. And this, we think, provides two perspectives on how to compare states and how to think about how much they're spending. Overall, I want to say about $3.30 per person is spent by Federal Highway Administration or with federal transportation funds on biking and walking throughout America. So, you know, that's less than your coffee at Starbucks is going to all of those bike lanes, sidewalks, crosswalks, rapid flashing beacons, hawk signals, trails, all of that. Less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So that per capita figure sometimes does show up higher for rural states, but not always. And there is a lot that could be said about how our federal funding is allocated by formula between states that could contextualize that per capita figure, but it's probably better that I don't get into that now. And so, again, for each of those metrics, you can go and look directly at the underlying data at data.bikeleague.org. You can also find other blogs and information to help contextualize it, like this chart that shows annual bicyclist deaths by the agencies that own the roads where the bicyclist is hit and killed. And you can see that state highway agencies own most of those roads throughout the United States, and that there has been an increase since 2015. And this data only goes back to 2015. So we know addressing states and their practices and the road designs that they use is really important for bicyclist safety. And that's one of the reasons that we do this ranking. And so what to expect with our ranking release next month. There will be a national report that gives some of these summary statistics. Every state will get a report card that'll break down the categories, give feedback, have those key data that I just mentioned, talk about the bicycle-friendly actions that I'm going to talk about a little bit more coming soon. And then, of course, there will be the ranking, which everyone often has feelings about. And you know, is a real reason that we see media interest and uptake of this data. And we hope it pushes states to do more things that are bicycle friendly and make people's experiences while biking better. So some of the key changes for the 2024 bicycle friendly state ranking, we have a new bicycle friendly action. We reorganized our categories, and we tried to intentionally integrate some of our other work, some of our campaign work into our bicycle friendly state ranking. So I'm gonna walk you through that now. So first, the new bicycle friendly action. We started doing these bicycle friendly actions in, I think, 2015. And these are 5 actions that we want every state to take. And they are a safe passing law, having a complete streets policy. That can be a law, which is the best. It could be a policy adopted by your state DOT, which I think is probably second best. Or it can be something like a resolution design guidance, an aspirational document that says that you want to do it. All of those things can be recognized as a complete streets bicycle-friendly action. We use the database compiled by the National Complete Streets Coalition for this action, so that if you're looking at what national organizations like ourselves say, you don't see two organizations telling you different things. So that's where we look for that data. Bike plans, we want every state to have a statewide bike plan, and it's been really great. You can see here, there's been a really strong uptick in the number of states with bike plans. But we also don't just want them to adopt it once. We want them to adopt it at least once every 10 years. That's kind of our planning time horizon that we think is reasonable for states. And then we are looking for every state to spend 2% of its federal funding on biking and walking. And that really goes back to in 1991, when federal transportation funding for biking and walking was created, its allocation was 2% of that federal funding. So we are asking states to kind of meet that initial push by Congress to use that allocation fully. And unfortunately, it is our worst performing bicycle-friendly action. And we are still looking for states to meet that 2% obligation threshold often. Generally, more states are taking more actions over time. Most take 3 or more bicycle-friendly actions. 3 of those actions are one time, so you only have to pass a safe passing law once. You only have to pass a complete streets law once. And our new action looking at speed limit laws is, again, you only have to do it once, and then it perpetuates it for all time, hopefully. And then 2 of those actions require ongoing efforts. That's the bike plan every 2 years and the 2% federal funding. We look at that every 2 years based on 3-year averages of each state's obligations as reported by FHWA. But there's plenty of room for those states on the low end, those 8% that have only taken one action, the 26% that have only taken 2, to take another action, move on up, make that progress. And for us, ideally, this would all be green with every state taking all 5 actions. So some notes on some of those specific actions. Bike plans, this is a diffusion of innovation curve, which kind of like treats bicycle plans as an innovation that is adopted by the marketplace over time. I want to say Hawaii was in the 1960s or 1970s when they adopted a bike plan. And then last time we did this in 2022, there were 8 states that had never adopted a bike plan. So it was really great to see Maine, Oklahoma, and South Carolina adopt bike plans since then. And Texas got very close and might argue with me that they did adopt a bike plan because they added significant components to their long-range transportation plan. But we are not going to recognize that as a statewide bike plan. And then there's a number of states that are still in that category. So we would love to see every state adopt it for their first time. And then again, we are looking for every state to do it every 10 years. I want to say New York has the oldest bike plan in the country for states that have adopted at least one, with their statewide bike plan being from like 1997 without an update. So our old bicycle-friendly action that we got rid of and that we're saying goodbye to is that each state should have a bicycle safety emphasis area in its strategic highway safety plan. The Strategic Highway Safety Plan is a document required by federal law for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is about $3 billion of funding that is distributed to each state. So in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or in Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed in 2021, there were some new requirements for that Highway Safety Improvement Program. So Part of that was a requirement that all road users are considered. Part of that was a requirement that every state does a vulnerable road user safety assessment. And then part of that was a requirement that states where people biking and walking, non-motorized users, make up 15% or more of traffic fatalities, they have to spend 15% or more of their highway safety improvement program funds on non-motorized safety. So sidewalks, bike lanes, crosswalks, things that improve the safety of people outside of vehicles. So with those changes, we thought it was less important that each state create this specific bicycle safety emphasis area, because the policy change by Congress kind of covered what we wanted to have that safety emphasis area cover. So we got rid of that bicycle-friendly state action, and we replaced it with this new one, state laws for slow roads, which looks at three things. Whether the state has a speed limit of 20 miles per hour in urban districts or business districts. Those are often treated interchangeably by states. Whether they have a speed limit of 20 miles per hour in residential districts, or whether they otherwise give clear authority for 20 miles per hour speed limits in similar districts. So broadly applicable ability to implement 20 mile per hour speed limits without a lot of red tape, without the state DOT having to approve every single street. That's what we're looking at. That's where we're trying to quantify and reduce to a check mark with this bicycle-friendly state action. It is maybe a little bit more complicated than our other bicycle-friendly state actions, but we think it's a really important thing that those 20 mile per hour speed limits that are safer for all road users are in state laws and are something that cities can take advantage of easily without a lot of restrictions. And this is our chart that shows kind of the risk of death by various speeds. And so we think it's so important to allow 20 mile per hour speed limits, because when you are setting that default urban speed limit at 30 miles per hour, you are really saying that you want that default risk of death to be higher as a state, as a legislator. And we think having that lower default, if we can push each state down that risk curve and then eventually over time redesign our streets so that people drive at that speed because of the street design, there's a really great opportunity to create places that are better for biking and walking and save lives. So our bicycle-friendly action is based on the laws. It is not based on whether or not people actually go 20 miles per hour on those streets, but we want that default in state law, or a very easy process for localities to implement it. So category reorganization, Jamil talked about this a little bit. We used to have 5. You'll notice each of them had a conjunction. So it was always something and something. We wanted to make it so that as much as possible, things were one thing. And that ended up in 7 with one thing having a conjunction, an ampersand. So now it's funding, infrastructure laws, planning, safety, capacity, and support, and every ride just counts. And hopefully that's a little bit more cohesive and will be easier to kind of explain to folks than these ones that have infrastructure and funding together, policies and programs together, evaluation and planning together. We just hope it's a little bit easier for us to explain and for people who are using the report card or our report to explain. So here's a chart kind of looking at the available points for each category and then the average points from all 50 states in those categories. So we see some categories where states are doing better in our survey data and some categories where states are doing worse. Our best performing category is infrastructure, which is great. That asks a lot of questions about design guidance, training, and existence of infrastructure. And then our worst performed category is that every ride counts category, which asks questions about whether the state has a bicycle count program, whether it's working towards that idea of bicycle miles traveled, how much bicycling is actually happening in their state, so that we can lessen or get rid of our reliance on those American Community Survey estimates of bicycle commuters and have that more straightforward equivalent to what motor vehicle traffic has enjoyed for 70 plus years. So that's a little overview of kind of how categories compare to each other and state performance in those categories compare to each other. Some highlights. One of our best scoring questions was this infrastructure question about whether protected or separated bike lanes are installed on state controlled roadways. So, you get full points in this question for yes, multiple locations. The more separated or protected bike lanes, the better. This year, we added those options around shared use paths because we got feedback from state agencies in previous versions of this question that they didn't have protected bike lanes, but they did have those shared use paths. So I think that is one of the things that allowed this to be a really well-scoring question for agencies. But maybe it doesn't quite have the sharpness that it used to have. And then, unfortunately, one of our lowest scoring questions here is, does your state DOT have a goal for the prevalence of people biking in the state? So do you want more people to be biking in the state? Do you want to go from 0.5% of commuters to 1% of commuters biking in your state? Do you want to go from, a third of your population getting on a bike once a year to half? Anything like that could serve as a goal that quantifies how much biking you want to happen in your state. And unfortunately, a lot of states do not have goals for increasing biking. So that's unfortunate, and one of those areas for improvement for many states. And so just a little bit on campaign integration. We are trying to have some bigger campaigns around big ideas at the league. So 3 of them kind of overlapped with our Bicycle Friendly State program, and we're trying to integrate them into our questions and our messaging. So Slow Roads Save Lives is that, speed limit and speed management campaign, where our big idea is that 20-mile-per-hour speed limits should be a normal part of our transportation networks. And by promoting that, we will meaningfully impact speed management. When you look at how fast bicyclists travel, most people don't bike over 20 miles per hour that often. I think the Strava data average is around 16 miles per hour. A lot of bike share users are going to be slower than that. And so when you're looking at how you bike with traffic or bike next to traffic, if we have those lower 20-mile-per-hour speeds, there's going to be less conflict, less times where that driver really feels like they have to overtake you, even though we know they don't necessarily need to. So just having those low speed roads, having those bike routes that are 20 miles per hour is something we want to see. And we know when other things go wrong, if people are going slow, we can still have safety, because if there's a crash, it's less likely to injure or kill someone. So we think that 20 mile per hour idea is a really important idea and a really important goal. And so we're excited to embed that in our Bicycle Friendly State program moving forward with our Slow Roads Save Lives campaign. And I'll hand it to Jamil for this one.
Thanks, Ken. And so the next campaign we're really trying to integrate is our Ready to Ride campaign. And if you're not familiar with our Ready to Ride campaign, I'll break it down as simply as possible. It's to get all kids on bikes in all schools. And it sounds simple, right? Like Yeah. But for real, there's a ton of amazing cycling education occurring already in schools nationwide. To name a few, Safe Routes, Stride Education Foundation, Outride, and Trips for Kids support in-school cycling education programs in thousands of schools across the country. Our goal with the Ready to Ride campaign is to ensure all students have access to on-bike education in their schools during regular instructional hours through policy pathways and helping to connect the already existing network of youth cycling education providers to local districts and schools. And as I mentioned earlier, we included 2 new questions in the safety category. Those 2 questions focused on, you could probably guess, in-school cycling education. And so those questions were, does your state include bicycling proficiency as part of the state's education standards? And 2, does your state DOT administer or contract with any third-party organizations to administer bicycling education in schools? And as we continue to build the Ready to Ride campaign and our understanding of the metrics that matter, we foresee revisions and the addition of more cycling education-related questions. And back to you, Ken.
Thanks, Jamil. Yeah, I think really big idea, really exciting campaign. There's amazing work being done, and there is so much work to do. And then finally, we had this Make Every Ride Count campaign as part of Bike Month this year. So I wanted to integrate that idea that every ride should count into the Bicycle Friendly State program when we created this new category that was all about counting and how much biking is happening. So the big idea here is that commuter estimates are not enough to understand bicycle travel. And we really need to get to that area where we have national, state, local bicycle volume reporting so that we have a better understanding of how much biking is happening throughout the nation. And we kind of have some parity in data with what motor vehicles have had for more than 70 years. And it's not just me saying this. There was a US DOT report to Congress on the complete streets model of kind of creating complete streets for all users. And they said non-motorized travel volumes are the most broadly applicable data that would aid in implementing complete streets. Without volume data, agencies cannot measure the efficacy of projects intended to increase pedestrian and bicycle travel. So we are kind of stuck in this world where it is hard to tell our story of whether or not we are being effective until we have this better data where we are counting rides, where we are counting travel. And so it's unfortunate that this year it was our lowest scoring category. But that's just points out that we have a lot of work to do, and hopefully we can get there and kind of move the ball forward by making sure that it's an important part of our program. And so we're at the end of our overview. So I want to make a plug for our next webinar, which is going to be e-bikes for everyone, how cities are making e-bike ownership a reality. That's going to be November 12th. So I think that's 2 weeks from now, also at 3 p.m. So hopefully you can join us then. And I think now it's time for questions, which I think I see some in the Q&A. Okay, so got a question. Can you discuss a perceived bias that the 2022 survey had towards states with large metro areas? Large metro areas often do more for biking and walking. Our survey focuses on what state DOTs do. It's possible that state DOTs are influenced by larger metro areas, and in places where they don't have a large metro area to influence them, they're less likely to see biking and walking as important parts of what they do. There are examples of rural states without particularly large metro areas having higher rates of biking to work than other states. So I think of like an Alaska that has a relatively high bike to work rate, or places like Montana that don't have particularly large metro areas, but some of those metro areas really do have great biking, like Missoula, Montana. So I don't see large metro areas as an important part of our bicycle-friendly state survey or criteria. They're really not accounted for in any way. But it is possible that there is a political dynamic that influences the actions that state DOTs take, where states with larger metro areas are more likely to address biking and walking issues than states without large metro areas, regardless of whether or not their largest metro areas are good for biking and walking. So I hope that answers your question, but I love all the states. I love small metro areas. I live in a city of just under 100,000. So I hope I don't have a bias towards large metro areas, because that would be a bias against my city. Is there a toolkit to roll out the Every Ride Counts campaign? I don't believe so. When we did it in National Bike Month, we were really promoting the work with one of our partners, Love to Ride, and they had a app that both would help you log your rides and report on the conditions of your rides. So it was really structured around that. I think as we are messaging what we've learned from the Bicycle Friendly State Survey, there is going to be this initial push with the ranking and that national report and kind of like what we're seeing. And then there might be some opportunity to kind of dig into some of the more specific aspects of some of the categories. So it's good to hear that there is the interest in Every Ride Counts. Are e-bikes counted towards traffic fatality data? Yes, 2022 was the first year that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration counted e-bikes as bikes in their fatality analysis reporting system. So e-bikes are now counted as bicycles in our national fatality statistics. That is new as of the most recent year available, which is 2022. They didn't report it separately, and as of this time, I'm not aware of any way to use. It's called NHTSA First is the tool that you can use to query their data system. I'm not aware of a query in that system for you to get e-bikes separately from non-e-bikes in their fatality reporting. If you are a statistics whiz and can download the raw data, you can find it, but I am not a statistic whiz in that sense. And then, as far as I'm aware, the American Community Survey does not differentiate between bikes and e-bikes, but it also does not provide guidance to survey takers. If a survey taker, for whatever reason, didn't feel like they could say that they rode a bicycle because they rode an e-bike. So e-bikes likely play into our ridership data as well, but we have no insight into that, unfortunately. Most common missing law in the law category. So that's a good question. I don't know offhand what is the most common missing law. I suspect that it is, we asked a question about whether each state collects data on the demographics of people who are cited for traffic citations. And I know a lot of states don't do that. We also ask about automated enforcement. So the use of speed cameras or red light cameras. And there's a lot of states that don't do that. Some states are silent on that. Some states prohibit it. I think like 8 states prohibit speed cameras. And those are some of the areas that I would be looking for the most common missing laws. But we have that data, so we can dig into it. I just don't know it right now. Do we have a rollout timeline for the rankings? We did say next month, and that is vague. Our current goal, I think, is the week of the 18th. And I hope we can hit it, and we're going to try to hit it. We don't want to release the ranking while everyone is watching football and eating turkey. We want to make sure that it's getting the visibility that all of the hard work of the agency staff and advocates who have interacted with us to put it together have put in. But that's what we're looking for. That's our timeline. And I guess the question about adding bicycle-friendly states to the Bicycle-Friendly America programs. Yeah, it's a weird, atypical Bicycle-Friendly America program in that every state gets ranked, and all of our other Bicycle-Friendly America programs, communities, businesses, and universities opt in. We are interested in trying to figure out something that's a little bit like more opting into our agenda of bicycle friendliness that states can do for our next iteration. Looking forward to 2026. But you know, we're all under the Bicycle Friendly America banner. We're just a little bit different in that states can't opt out. Do I know how many states are using automated speed cameras? I do not offhand. So there's 2 places I would suggest that you look. One, the Governor's Highway Safety Association. They have a resource that looks at state laws that enable red light cameras and speed cameras, but they don't necessarily report on the actual existence of programs. And then the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety does some reporting on actual programs. So that can give a little bit more detail where states maybe don't have laws that cover it, but there are communities that are implementing programs that don't violate state law because there's no state law, but also don't have kind of the state authority that enables them to do it. So I would look to those 2 sources if you want to dig into that. Jamil?
Yeah. The Governor's Highway Safety Association on their data most recently has 19 states and DC have passed laws that permit the use of speed cameras. And I would drop that link in the chat.
Thank you. And I guess, yeah, do we have any more questions or, you know, we're looking forward to the ranking coming out. Again, we're really appreciative of all the work that the state agency staff have put into it and the advocates. We're trying to put that all together so that we're creating those useful report cards for all of you, and a ranking that reflects what's happening on the ground in your states. This is, you know, it's a mix of achievement and effort. When we do rankings, you know, it's not just the state with the most bike commuters wins, which is Oregon. It's always Oregon, or at least by percentage, not number, because you know Oregon's not that big of a state, but they always have the highest percentage of people biking to work. But yeah, we're excited, and we'll hopefully be back with the ranking and report cards and that guide, and when all that stuff comes out. And if you have any questions, we're here to answer them. And we hope that it really inspires states to do more to make people's bike rides better. All right. If we don't have any other questions, I think we're we're going to wrap it up, and thank you all for attending and being part of the Bicycle Friendly State program. We're looking forward to getting that all out to you later, and really appreciate you tuning in to hear about what's changed and what to look forward to today.